Welcome back. This is another installment of MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. In these episodes, I sit down with the people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes, and my guest today is Kevin Plunkett. Kevin's Vice President of Partnerships at Salary.com, where he spent the better part of 26 years at the forefront of compensation data. Before finding his way into the world of comp, Kevin had a different kind of career entirely, working as a talent agent in Hollywood. Today, his focus is the wholesale side of the business, bringing Salary.com's compensation data to the staffing firms, HR vendors, and platforms that build it into their own products. He works at the intersection of data, technology, and the fast-changing economics of pay, helping partners understand not just what the numbers say, but how markets are trending and why it matters. With more than 2 decades watching compensation move from the back room to the boardroom, Kevin has a front row seat to how data is reshaping the way companies attract, retain, and pay their people. Welcome to Behind the Build. Thanks for joining me, Kevin.
Thank you, Curtis. I appreciate it.
Been looking forward to this one a lot. For a lot of reasons. Number one, I'm super interested to hear about your background in Hollywood. But even though that's kind of secondary, Salary.com has really built this infrastructure that a lot of organizations run on. And that's a super interesting conversation to have, especially, given the ultimate outcomes, right, that we're looking for, attracting, retaining,
Sure.
and paying their people. So, before we kind of get into that, I have to ask about this career arc, right? It's not the one most people in the space have. You spent time as a talent agent before landing at Salary.
Yep.
What got you started there, and then what pulled you from that world?
Yeah, fair enough. So initially, upon getting out of college, I went actually into an acting. I went to go pursue an MFA in acting, right?
Okay.
At a conservatory program. I spent about a year in that program, and I realized, the actor's life was not going to be for me. So I thought, well, let's get into producing because, that was interesting. So I wanted to do television production and started locally, worked at, local newscast for about a year and a half. And then quickly found out at that time, this is back in, late 80s now, everything was running out of Hollywood, right? There wasn't much coming out of New York. There wasn't much in Canada. Like, you didn't have all of these outlets and places and things. It was everything was centralized in Hollywood. So I quickly realized, if I want to make a splash in this business, I got to be out there. So packed up the car, drove across country. As luck would have it, I wound up landing a job at, the premier talent agency in Hollywood at the time, Creative Artist Agency. Happened to have a family friend that worked there, and he helped kind of grease the skids and got in as a temp. And within a week, I had a permanent placement. So started off in what they call TV Lit, which was writers and directors for television, and did that for probably about 6 months. And then a desk opened up with in feature motion picture lit that, again, represents writers and directors. And these are, and the second desk is the one that I spent, a good chunk of my time there. And then there was a big, there was this whole kind of takeover, well, if you will, like the head guys that were running the show, this guy, Michael Ovitz, left, and then the sort of baton got passed to this group, what they call the Young Turks, of which my boss was one. So all of a sudden, my stock kind of rose with his, right? Mm-hmm. And, now I'm all of a sudden working on, one of the premier desks in all of Hollywood. So that was kind of exciting. And yes, we worked with lots of stars and people you would know, directors, writers, actors, all of it. So I did that for quite a while. And then eventually I left there and went and became an agent at a smaller agency, where I could really kind of dig in and cut my teeth. Did that for about 2 years. And then I just got burned out on the whole thing. And, and the internet was just kind of getting started. This is around 2000 now. And my thought was, well, maybe I'll move up to San Francisco. I had a bunch of buddies that were out there and, see what I can find out there. At the same time, as I'm sort of figuring all this out, my brother started, he actually started salary.com and had pulled it together initially. It was, the initial piece was more like what Yahoo, almost like a directory of compensation. And so, sort of my first job was helping him build out the website so he could go out and get some funding. And what I was, required to do is go out and find salary data information that was posted, on the internet. Remember, this is back in 2000 when the internet wasn't what it is today. There was no Google. There was no super easy way to find stuff. You had to really dig. So we would, the goal was find all this stuff, organize it in a way. We basically had these categories, and we had all this salary and compensation information tucked in, and it was really like a directory. You'd click on the link and it would take you to a page. Eventually, we wound up building out what we call the salary wizard. It's still in existence today. It's the thing that really launched the company as a whole. And it was a product that people could go in, put in a job title, put in a geography and industry, and get a salary range back. And at the time, that was pretty cutting edge, right? And back then, my job was to run partnerships for that product, where we basically syndicated. When syndication was a big deal, we would syndicate content, and we syndicated that to every career site you could think of, every newspaper career section, every magazine career section, anything that had to do with careers, we syndicated this salary wizard. And at the time, I think at its peak, I think we had like close to 800 partnerships where we had syndicated this content. So that's what really got salary.com as a brand launched, was through that syndication network. And then as that grew, we started getting more eyeballs, and so we needed to monetize them. And so we started doing advertising. So I did both of those things, led both of those groups for quite a while, until we got enough traction within the HR side of the house with our HR specific products, which is really what the company is known for now, is the HR products that we provide. And then I started doing partnerships with that suite of products. So I can go in more depth there if you want, but that gives you at least an idea of kind of the basics.
That is a great, it's a really interesting story, and it's a really interesting kind of career trajectory. For folks who don't kind of live in this world, when you say you sell compensation data like wholesale, what does that actually mean? Who shows up to buy it? What are they trying to do with it?
Let me take a step back and just give a quick overview of the company as a whole, and that'll help frame how this little section that I'm been working on and working to grow and develop came to be. So when you think of salary.com, you sort of think of us as sort of your one-stop shop for any and all compensation needs, right? We've got data, we have software, and we have services. And we tend to meet the customer where they're at in their journey and help them to be as self-sufficient as they want to be within this, journey of compensation, right? Sure. Typically ties into philosophy and growth and a whole bunch of different other macro kind of goals that the organization is trying to meet. And compensation obviously supports all of those. So how do we help that company get there through the lens of compensation? As part of that, we created probably one of the best and most sort of broad-based interpolated data sets available, right? It is all HR supported data. We don't have any, there's no user supported data in there or user inputted data in. It's all HR coming directly from HR organizations, typically from salary surveys is really at its base. And it's hundreds and hundreds of publicly available salary surveys. So we've built out this whole big, broad taxonomy of jobs with, it's like 20,000 different industries across 224 different sub-industries, company sizes. Here in the US, we're able to draw all the way down to the zip code level. So a really robust data set. And we as an organization got to be known for having this really high quality data set, right? That is really broad and really touches pretty much all jobs across the US, Canada, and now we're in 30 different countries. So we only sold that data set through our software products and directly to end customers. We would get asked by other HCM vendors, payroll companies, staffing firms, what have you, if they could get access. And we, for a while, said no, 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 no. Then we started giving people access through the product. But eventually what happened was people wanted to get access to the data through some kind of a feed, an API or a data file. And they wanted to take that data, put it into their offering, either through a data lake and merge it with other data sets, or they wanted to tap in through an API and be able to pull it right into the software product. We for a long time didn't want to go down that route. That changed about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, when we started to dip our toe in that. And that's what I'm doing now is I'm sort of heading up the sales in that area where we're looking at effectively wholesaling the data sets that we have. And we've certainly grown. We have more data sets than just the comp analyst data set now. But it's the wholesaling of all of those data sets and the delivery of either through an API or through a cube, a data cube, right? Like a CSV file. That's really where what's really been driving this. And AI has been a big supporter. The advent of AI has been a big help in pushing that because people want more and more data into their systems.
When a staffing firm or HR vendor, when they come to you, I'm curious, what are they really after? Is it the raw data itself, or is there a story they're trying to tell their own customers, their own people, their own?
Yeah, so it will depend, right? The use cases vary. In some cases, they're trying to support an existing methodology that they have, like
Okay.
vis-a-vis like a staffing firm. Staffing firms are, one of the bigger use cases is they sometimes need a third-party validation to help educate all parties about what, a particular job is in a particular region. So where staffing firms get into, some challenges is they go in, they've got a customer that's kind of got, champagne taste and beer budgets, right, when it comes to providing compensation. And the staffing firm's trying to say, hey, look, guys, we can't really go recruit for that because you're paying well below market. And, the customers go, well, this is what I see the market at. That's where we can really help and say, look, here's a valid, a quality, a third party that can validate what the market is for that given position. And so, there's a data set there that does that. And that helps a lot.
You mentioned these different ways that you're delivering this now, right? The API, the bulk, feed, the into customers, own data lakes. Unpack that for me a little bit. Like what kind of customer reaches for which, and why does the delivery
Sure.
method matter as much as the data itself?
Again, sometimes this is use case based. And other times it's more just sort of philosophical. So where an API works is you've got some volume running through your system. We've got this sort of AI matching functionality, right? So you just put in, bare minimum, you could put a job title and you can get a salary result. The more data you put in, the better the return of the salary range will be. So you'll get a much tighter range, a better range. So, as an example, a company may be looking to provide guidance around pay transparency on,
Mm,
let's say, a staffing or
okay.
through an ATS system. Um, and they want to be able to, give advice to the company that's doing the posting. Hey, look, this is, more or less the range that the market is suggesting. You're suggesting a salary range, either really high or really low. You may want to rethink that, right? That's one application. Another application is you've got, let's say, a compensation planning module within a larger HCM suite, think a payroll company, and they want to provide benchmarking to help provide some external analysis around jobs, so their companies can understand, what's the benchmark for this position in
Yeah.
this area. API is great for pulling that in. Where the data cube, where the cube might be valuable, is some folks may not want to deal with an API. They may not want sometimes APIs can slow performance. Ours is pretty fast, so we haven't had that problem, but there's a perception that, folks want to deal with everything in-house. They want to deal with all of the data. They want to dump it into a data lake. Maybe they're commingling it with other data sets or other taxonomies or what have you, or they want to handle and control all the matching, right? They want to go through and handle and do all that matching because they've got their own taxonomy that they like and they use, and they don't want to be reliant on our AI matching technology to work. So, you know, having a certain element of control of data will help differentiate which mechanism works better
Yeah.
for one versus the other.
You made an interesting point. I think in our last comp, we've spoken a couple of times. Made an interesting point that for a long time, comp lived, in the back room. I think is how you described it. And I'm curious how that's changed. Like, when did compensation start
Sure.
moving to the forefront of the HR conversation?
So comp's always been this, like, little, section within HR, right?
Yeah.
It is always, comp is certainly responsible for probably your largest expenditure across an organization, and it was always kind of, you know run by some folks in the comp area that are really good with numbers, really good with data, really good with spreadsheet, like really good analytic type people. All of HR doesn't exist in that realm, right? You look at recruiters, you look at people that are doing learning and development, you look at people that are doing, handling sort of just general HR. That is not the skill set that generally is found within HR. That's the comp sort of skill set is probably more akin to, like, something you might find in accounting, right? It's heavy data driven, heavy numbers
Yeah.
driven. So the so just by its nature, it just kind of, the skill sets didn't necessarily mesh together. Comp has always been important, obviously, but comp kind of tended to sort of operate on this own little island almost. And it typically was not the place that got the most budget, right? Recruiting is always very sexy, and everybody thinks, oh, we got to recruit, we got to recruit. Money gets thrown there, money gets thrown at payroll, money gets thrown in a whole bunch of areas. Comp has always been one area that didn't really get lots of budget, right? It's important, it's valuable, but you always had to fight for it, right? It
Seems
wasn't
like
like
COVID was a really big turning point for
COVID
all
was a
that.
huge turning point, because what happened was it changed the dynamic, because now all of a sudden the companies were no longer really in charge of driving comp in the way that they had always historically been. Now you had individuals that, maybe were headquartered in, the company maybe was headquartered in New York City, but you had somebody living out in, Wichita, Kansas. How are you going to pay that person? You're going
Right.
to pay them based on how the headquarters operates, or where the person lives, through a big wrench into things. Now all of a sudden you could start to recruit people. People didn't have to be within a 20, 30, 40-mile radius of the office. You could
Hmm.
get that, that analytics guy that lives in, Sioux Falls, Idaho, and, who was a rock star, but, he didn't have a ton of opportunities. Now all of a sudden, you know, you can recruit him in. He's working for a top rated firm in New York City. You know, again, it just really threw a wrench. And now you've got all these people kind of moving, right? Changing jobs. There was a lot of job change going on during COVID. A lot of people coming in, a lot of people leaving. You had retention issues. You had all of this stuff. And then what was the response? The response was, oh, well, we need to pay competitively. And now all of a sudden the market is nationwide. It's not localized. So that put another input. And so now and then there were signing bonuses. So now all of a sudden you had people coming in at much higher rates. You had somebody coming in with 2 years of experience getting paid more than someone there
Yeah.
that was at 7 years of experience. Now all of a sudden you have compression issues.
I
All of
was
this
going to
happened
ask about that.
all at the same time, and it was just magnified. And it was just a confluence of issues that
Sure.
really drove the value of having a good, strong compensation strategy. That's what organizations figured out is if I don't have a good, solid comp strategy, any one of these kinds of influences is going to screw up my whole comp plan.
What
And
happens
that
to an
became so
organization?
important.
What happens to an organization when that compression goes unaddressed?
Well, I mean, you know, you're going to have some very unhappy people at your organization. I mean, you know, you've got guys that are there, senior level experienced guys, with 5, 10 years of experience at the company who are all of a sudden getting paid at the same or maybe less than, people that are rolling in fairly new. I mean, that's not, you're gonna have some major
Yeah.
retention issues.
Yeah. Not good
Um,
for culture.
you know and then it creates problems, right? You already have enough tension when it comes to levels of experience within the same job, but now all of a sudden now you got people getting paid at different rates. That just adds to that
Yeah.
tension, right, and just makes work harder.
Yeah. That's it's definitely not ideal for culture, I think, within your
No.
organization. I do want to shift to something I mentioned when we just got started, right? This angle I kind of find fascinating. The bigger shift happening where the infrastructure, I think, the unseen layer in the stack
Hmm.
powering the platforms, it becomes the defensible moat, right? Rather than sitting, on top of it. So I'm curious, like, how you see salary.com fitting into that picture.
So, I think through COVID, right, comp had certainly got a boost, right, in its, a stronger voice at the table, um, more attention to uh, coming up with and managing and handling and keeping a pay philosophy intact, checking on it, making sure it was, you know, you don't just create the pay philosophy and throw it in the drawer, right? And let,
Right.
managers hire whoever they want. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. So people are definitely looking at having a comp philosophy now and not that they didn't, but it's clear that having a strong comp philosophy and one that you stick with and one you continue to work with, um, helps avoid some of these pitfalls that can happen. So I'm not really answering your question, but um, like in recruiting, right? If you give a lot of power to your manager to go out and recruit, they're going to come back and say, oh, what historically in compensation folks have always tended to want to pay by the job. Recruiters and hiring managers want to pay by the person. Look at
Hmm.
this person. Look at their resume. Look at where they went to school. Look at all these great skills. We got to pay this guy top dollar. He deserves it. Yeah, but he doesn't because sure, school is fine, that's great, but it's not really that impactful in this particular job. Nor is the fact that he's a PhD and we only require college education. Like there are things that get people all hyped up and fired up and excited about that may or may not truly impact um, the compensation, or may have a less of a compensable input into a job than let's say a recruiter or a hiring manager or even the individual themselves, right? And now, so those things kind of create this tension and put tension against that pay philosophy on an ongoing basis, right? And there's been always this battle between recruiting and compensation, right? The comp folks generally handle the budget, they generally set the ranges. And then the recruiting guys go, oh, those are too low. We can't get anybody. We can't get anybody. And there's just been this constant tension back and forth. It's getting better. And because of the software and because of the tools, there's more communication going on at that level. There's more feedback. Recruiting can sort of comment and say, hey, look, this is what we're seeing in the market. This is where we have our range set. Can we take a look at that? Can we make adjustments? So there's more of a two-way street going on now than there ever has been. I don't think that really answered your question, but
Well, you at the end here, you definitely alluded to some of it. Like, so when your data is embedded inside someone else's platform, that end customer never really sees salary.com, right? And
well, they can. I mean, a lot of times because of the nature of who we are, we offer this as a white label or co-branded.
okay,
It doesn't, but I haven't yet to have anybody tell me they don't want our brand on it.
sure. You mentioned a while ago when we spoke this promise of integrated talent management. I think was kind of
Correct.
the way that you referred to it, and it's interesting, right? Because a dozen years ago, right, everything was supposed to connect, and they did it in different ways. And nowadays, are we finally seeing platforms move in that more holistic direction?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, you're seeing some skills, right? So as part of comp, the other area that's big is the job description.
Mm-hmm.
And often, and again, this is another back and forth between recruiting and comp. Recruiters typically will build out the job rec, but it's usually based off of some kind of a job description that
Mm-hmm.
comes out of the comp team. And they've set tiers, and there are certain competencies that are associated, proficiency levels that are needed, right?
Right.
When you do a true comp analysis, you're also going through what's considered a job architecture process, where you're tying in all of your jobs so they all make sense, right? The levels are all the same. The competencies that need to be spread across the organization at certain levels are all the same, so that when you get to the pay part, right, you're paying equally, even though the jobs may be very different in nature. You're able to categorize them in a way that a manager of linemen in an electric company is the same as a manager of the sales team that's outputting, and that um, there's consistency among those levels, right? So as part of that, as part of going through that job architecture piece, you're looking at skills, you're looking at competencies, you're building all of those out. Those are all the building blocks for integrated talent management when you get down to it. And we're seeing a bigger and bigger push into recruiting for skill sets, paying by skill sets, or certain skills, right? There's been more of a push in these areas. It's been harder to do the pay by skills piece than it is the recruit by skills piece,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
still, they're both valuable and important. And because there is more data flowing in underneath that foundational level around competencies and skills, the promise of that integrated talent management again makes sense, because in effect you're able to do that architecture so that and a manager is a manager is a manager is a manager regardless of what department they're in. A director is a director is a director, again, regardless of what department in. Now you can start to draw parallels between and amongst those jobs, and you're able to also then build those skill sets and the proficiency levels that are necessary for those jobs. And now you can really take something that maybe was a little more objective and make it far more subjective.
Um, I want to talk more about this sort of this foundational this the architecture at this foundational level. Like I hear a lot that HR data analysis is harder than it should be. A lot of it comes back to job data and architecture not being unified. Um, I'm curious, from your perspective, right? What is broken at that foundational level, and when the job data isn't really aligned or structured consistently, what does that actually cost the people trying to make decisions with it?
Well, I mean, that's it, right? And you'll see this time and time again. And anybody that has done any kind of implementation work, pulling data across with some of these systems, let's say you're switching payroll providers, or
Mhm.
let's say you're trying to utilize, one of the workforce analytics platforms where you're pulling data from multiple different sources. The challenge is data is data, right? And if you don't have good data governance and you don't have a good process for managing that data effectively, you're never going to be able to draw the parallels that are necessary for the analytics you want. And that's where the challenge becomes. Now, the promise around the integrated talent management piece was, oh, it's all going to be on one platform, therefore all the data will work. That's true if it was done right. But what we find But what we find is a lot of shortcuts were taken.
Yeah.
Like, ask any payroll provider, they're going to tell you, like, at a basic level, a job description is not required. A job architecture is not required. And therefore, you have you have all these payroll companies with, millions and millions of records in there. And in a lot of cases, they don't even have they don't even have job titles, let alone job descriptions. Like, job descriptions, maybe 18-20% on any payroll platform will have an actual job description in it. I
Mhm.
mean, that's crazy. How can you possibly start to look at parallels
Yeah.
and draw comparisons when you're not even looking at the basic, you're not even starting at a basic level with data. I mean, you're asking people to, run a marathon, and people are showing up in cars and bikes and all sorts of different
Mhm.
contraptions to run the marathon, and there's no rule. Nobody
Right.
cares.
Right. I mean, that's really an interesting way to way to look at it. Like, I never really considered it, with that analogy, but I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that, just to kind of even take it a step further, I know that AI obviously changes a lot of the data conversations.
It
I think.
can. Doesn't necessarily. It can.
Talk to me about that. Talk to me about
So
where it
again,
changes the game.
well, so data. I mean, AI in its of itself is a prediction engine. Let's right. It takes data in, it looks at it, and gives you a prediction as to what your an answer that you think that it thinks is accurate, right?
Mhm.
There are hallucinations, right? We've all heard
Mhm.
about those
Oh yeah.
within AI. A lot of those, I'm not going to say all, but some of those hallucinations are based on the fact that the data that was inputted isn't accurate and right, or it's off, or it's
Right.
mismatched, or that's what creates some of these challenges. So if you have an AI platform that's pulling data that's accurate and strong, great, awesome. It should work well, right? It should be able to predict effectively. But if the data that's going in it or the data that's supporting in it isn't unified, isn't, you know, and I'm gonna change what I just said in a second, but it's the it's the data in, data out concept. If the data going in is garbage, so is the output. Now, AI can help clean that up, sure. AI can help do a lot of those things and make it better. But at the end of the day, AI needs to be told what the baseline is. AI can't AI doesn't know what the baseline is. It's guessing what the baseline is, but it doesn't actually know necessarily. So it needs help in understanding. So it has to be educated. That's why you have these LLMs, right? Language models.
Yeah.
They help educate and help educate the AI and help it get stronger.
I think that, I think a lot of people see it as a threat to data companies. Others see it as an opportunity. You raised a point that I think about sometimes. I think that, and this is, when we spoke before, but I think a lot of customers are perfectly happy with a free answer they get from like GPT or Claude or whatever, and others need to know that, how those numbers, how they got there, and how they were arrived at. I mean, I'm kind of curious, like, A, give me the pros and cons to that, and then B,
Sure.
like, who's the one that needs the deeper answer? Why is it so hard to get it from those tools?
So the short answer is I don't know 100%. I can hypothesize some of it,
Yeah.
and some of it I can give you a fairly decent answer, but I don't 100% know the correct answer. But here's what I do know. So, yes, there are folks that will throw a number or ask a question to ChatGPT or Claude or what have you and get a response back and go, okay, great, I got my answer. Now, is that the right answer? Maybe, maybe not. Again, data in, data out. So,
Yep.
question is, what are those? What are those? What are those different applications? Where are they getting their data? For the
Mhm.
most part, it's going to be publicly available data. It's data they scraped, data they pulled. Now, if anybody's worked with posting data, which we actually have a posting data set as well, you're going to find it's not so easy to kind of pull and aggregate that data because it can be all over the map.
Yeah.
And so, as an AI tool, how's the AI tool going to know what's the right one and what isn't? How are they going to know that you know um, you know this is an accurate answer and this is not an accurate answer? It doesn't really know that. I would argue that our salary wizard is probably the seed for a fair number of the answers you might get through AI because it's publicly available and it's easy and it was easy to scrape. I would never use that as a product to base my compensation strategy around.
Sure.
It was created for consumers to give them an idea of the basic idea of a basic salary range. It was better than nothing. They had nothing. This was
Mhm.
better than nothing. But I would say, in some cases, you can then drill down further with AI to understand what is the underlying data, and sometimes you'll get the answer to that, and sometimes you won't.
Yeah.
So, is AI going to be a problem for us? Sure. There will be customers that go, I don't want to pay you thousands of dollars to access your data and software. I'm going to go get it for free from Claude. Okay,
Yeah.
how about it?
Yeah. Yeah.
But you
How do
really want to be
you
basing your pay decisions on something you don't really know what is the underlying data for.
Right. I'm curious how you see the role of comp data changing over the next few years. If we're going to like look ahead for a little bit, especially as AI keeps sort of reshaping what's possible, and you start seeing a lot more of what you're talking about right now. How do you see the role of the data maybe changing over the next, or is it going to change over the next, couple of years? And
Um, I don't know enough to know how the data is going to change. I do know that AI certainly will impact compensation. I mean, we're doing it already, right? All of our products are all AI enabled. So instead of walking through workflows like you do in software, you can now have a series of agents do that work for you just by
Mhm.
asking the right questions. And so we've built, this an AI interface on top of maybe not almost all. I don't. It's not quite on everyone, but almost all of our software tools now. So, and we're getting much smarter about AI as a whole because at the end of the day, you know, if AI can help make a process faster and more efficient, that's a win for everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And today, when you're using software, you as the user are asking the questions. You as the user are acting like the agent, right? That gets created by AI. So if AI can do a lot of that stuff quickly you can move on to something more strategic and even better than what was hanging you up. So as an example, when we created comp analyst market data, the process for market pricing, a traditional market pricing a job, you had to look at X number of surveys. You had to narrow, you had to go and match all the jobs. You had to, like, doing that analysis by hand probably took a really good person, maybe like 15 minutes, and maybe on average about half an hour per job. When we rolled around with comp analyst, all that work was done for you. So all you had to do was just find the right job and match it, and then
Yeah.
you got a salary result. So we took what was taking people a half hour and changed it into seconds. Did that make that other stuff obsolete? Absolutely not. All it did was freed up time for that
Yeah.
compensation analyst. Instead of spending 2 weeks doing a compensation analysis, now they can do that whole analysis within maybe an hour or two in a day, and then they can move on to the next piece. And
Right.
they can, there's always stuff that doesn't get done.
Yeah.
There's always that next thing. And, hopefully AI will allow us to be more efficient and get us there faster so
Yeah.
that we can do the more strategic
Right.
work that we've always dreamed of.
I love that, and I tend to kind of hold the same perspective on those things. So I can certainly appreciate that on just about every level. I want to wrap us up with a question I love to ask everyone.
All right, Harry, before
Um,
you do that, sorry,
yeah.
but as it relates to AI, okay, let's look at past history.
Okay.
Okay, you know, 1900s, most people got their information from newspapers, right? The
Right.
radio came in around what, 1920, 1930s, 1920s, I think, right? Or maybe even earlier. Everyone's, oh my God, that's going to blow away newspapers.
Yeah.
Did it? No. The two found a way to coexist. And then television came out. Television was going to knock out both radio and newspapers. Did that happen? Nope, of course not.
Right.
They all evolved. Same thing happened with, the internet.
Yeah.
Same concept. I mean, newspapers, they've had how many different technology changes, and they're still
Yeah.
around,
They're still
albeit
they're still around.
albeit they're a far cry from what they were, but they're still relevant and they're still
Yeah.
here and they're still new. So, do I think AI is going to wipe out all this software and wipe out everybody? No, people are going to adjust and they'll make changes and they'll learn to coexist with these new technologies and hopefully utilize those new technologies in a way to make themselves and their products better.
I like that. I like that, and I think you're absolutely right. The same thing happened when the internet, came around, and everybody thought that it was going to, just about destroy everything else, and it didn't. Everybody found a way to coexist. You know, we still have radio, we still have newspapers, we still have all those things, albeit, like you said, it's evolved a little bit. It's not the same as it was before, but it doesn't mean it's going to go away.
Correct.
Um, Kevin, if someone were to come to you, a business owner, a leader, an HR exec, or even somebody running partnerships for some HCM platform or vendor, and they really want to get compensation right and build it on a solid data foundation, right? Um, a lot of them, I think, are going to be tempted to chase that shiny, AI answer. what
Sure.
what's the single most important piece of advice you give them if you just have a moment? Maybe you're on an elevator right before you get to the top floor and the doors open and they walk right out of there. What is it that you tell them?
There are no shortcuts to getting it right. You've got to put the work in. And a lot of times that starts with, doing a comp analysis and doing a job architecture project where you're aligning all of your jobs. If you can get all of your jobs aligned and you can get the data, synchronized throughout the, all the different levels,
Yeah.
you can then start to really build. If you build the foundation correctly, you can build a major house. But if the foundation's crumbly or it's shifty or it's on sand, it doesn't matter how shiny or how cool or how wonderful your building's going to look like. It's still going to shift and move and probably collapse.
Yeah.
So you got to get the foundation right. And the foundation of all this is good, strong data. And it's job data, skills data, going through that architecture process. It's a pain in the butt to do it, but it really pays benefit and dividends when you get it right. And then obviously having good, strong, trusted compensation sources.
Yeah.
If you do all of those things, you're bound to get it right.
I like that. Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate you joining me today.
Yeah, no, this was great, Curtis. Listen, I could talk for another 2 hours. So
we'll have to save it for another. We'll have to have you back.
Well, I'll tell you what, if you really want to hear some of the Hollywood stories, we're going to have a separate podcast for that one.
That's right. Maybe with a glass of whiskey.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Big thanks to everyone watching and listening to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Visit mustardhub.com to learn about MustardHub, AI predictive foresight, and how it powers behavioral workforce intelligence for the global workforce. Until next time.